Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Cybersecurity Recruit podcast. Today, I'm joined by Tony. How you doing, my friend?
Very well, thank you. Thanks for inviting me on.
Good. No worries at all. So, for everyone listening, I'm just going to do Tony Boyle a bit of an introduction. Back in 2004, was at the University of Sheffield back in the UK, and then went on a bit of travel and did various things for around 2 years. Then Tony got his first job in recruitment back in 2011, a company called ESP. Was there for almost 8 years. After that, Tony went on to be a talent acquisition partner for NCC Group. He then progressed on to head of recruitment for NCC, and then he was global talent acquisition lead at NCC. And currently, Tony, you are the senior director of talent acquisition for Simio. How you doing, mate? Welcome to the show.
Thank you, yeah. Some fairly grand titles in there probably makes me sound a bit more important than I actually am.
Mate, you are important. That's the northern British guy in you, like the humbleness coming out.
Yeah, maybe.
But Tony, welcome to the show, my friend, and I'm excited to have you on, buddy. You've got a lot of experience. It's nice to have. You've got agency side recruitment, you've got experience, you've got talent acquisition recruitment. So there's going to be a lot we can talk about. I'm hoping the listeners and candidates and cybersecurity professionals listening are going to get a lot of value out of this. But I'll start where I always start, mate. Which is, I know I've done you a bit of an intro, but basically just who are you and what do you get up to on a day-to-day basis these days, my friend?
Yeah, I think thanks for that. When we initially spoke was last year, and I had to go to Brazil to get a new visa afterwards, which is why I've got this dodgy accent and I'm actually based in America. But that's all sorted out now. So I had 2 months over there. But then when I came back, I joined a company called Simio, who specialise in identity and access management services, professional and managed services. And I head up the global recruitment team. For me, I love people. I always have done, like connecting. That's what kind of gives me energy. So recruitment seemed like a natural fit for me. But as you said there in the intro, I started working in recruitment at a small kind of boutique recruitment agency where I was for about 8 years on the phones, hardcore, selling all day. And then I moved to the US and I joined NCC Group, who are a fairly large cybersecurity organization on the consulting side, who do things like pen test and incident response. And I think it is largest there. I was looking after a team of about 19 or 20 recruiters, including a couple of contractors. But yeah, now at Simio, been here 3 months. Things going really well, looking to hire more people, as we always are in the world of recruitment. But obviously the project side is important too, making things good from a candidate experience point of view and all that. So that's what's front of mind currently.
Cool, mate. Cool. Looking after 20 recruiters, I bet that was fucking wild on it.
It was cool, yeah. I think it was during the remote times where we needed a little bit of extra help. So we did plug in a few contractors. I had a team which was in the US, the UK, Netherlands, Australia. And then when we plugged some contracts in, it was to fill certain gaps, like all over the place. But it made the team feel a lot smaller when it was bigger, if that makes sense, because there was like loads of people to talk to and lots of ideas to throw at each other. And sometimes when you've got a small team and you only see people like every now and again, you can feel a little bit like isolated. And then when you've got a big team, rather than being overwhelmed, like I said, I love speaking to people, so it energizes me when you've got a lot of people around. Really good having lots of different ideas and a lot of different perspectives. Learned a lot about recruiting in Europe, particularly the Netherlands, where they've got different labour laws and workers' councils and things like that, which is interesting. But yeah, I loved it. Thought it was great.
Cool, my friend. All right, Tony. As director, you're at director level now on the talent acquisition side, and there'll be a lot of people listening out there thinking, how do they get a guy like yours attention when they're applying for a job? They'd probably like to know along the lines of, what is your ideal cybersecurity profile candidate? Any kind of tips and hints or advice for the listeners on that front?
Yeah, sure. So it obviously depends on the role, right? If I'm recruiting currently for a role in the identity and access management space, then you need someone that's got experience of a certain tool, or have a certain certification or something like that to be an architect or an engineer or something like that. So make sure that's easy to spot on someone's resume. But in reality, the things which I look for on resumes and things like that is progression. That's what's great to see. Kind of a bit of a non-cheesy way, I firmly believe that your work or your career or whatever is a bit like any kind of journey you go on in the car or whatever. You're going to have some obstacles and bumps in the road. Sometimes you'll be going a little bit slow. Sometimes you'll be going really fast and smoothly. But ultimately, you're going to get to your destination with perseverance. So it's our job really as recruiters to give people that platform to be the best possible versions of themselves. So I guess the way that you can manifest that in your resume and things like that is to talk about some of the progression you've had, not just in terms of moving jobs, but that might be courses or certifications or groups that you've joined, like outside of your day-to-day role. And I think if you do get the chance to speak to someone on the phone, I think authenticity is key. I think loads of people have got enthusiasm for the cybersecurity industry. It's such an interesting place to work and so many different facets to it. You'll know that better than anyone from dealing with all the clients that you do. But I think it's that enthusiasm for the industry which candidates need to shine through, particularly when it's a hyper competitive environment to be in.
Yeah, no, thanks, Tony. So just to summarize there, so basically, easy, whether it's a certification or a particular tool, make sure that the thing that's vital for that particular role is easy to spot on the resume. You're looking for clearly, or as clear as can, fairly clearly articulated progression on the resume, taking you on a journey. There's going to be some ups and downs, so you want to see people who have progressed nicely. And then, yeah, being authentic. I can relate that to another guest I had on, who's the VP at 6gen. He was saying, like, at the end when he asked a pen tester, what do you want to be? And the stock answer is, oh, I'd like to get into red team. And that's that same answer that everyone gives. Like, every pen tester wants to be a red team. But it's just maybe having something a bit different. And like I say, it is super competitive across the board at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think if I was your man there that was asking that interview question and I got that right back to me, I'd just say one word, which is why. And if someone's got a really good answer to that in a non-Simon Sinek kind of way, but if someone's got a really good answer to the why they want to get involved in the red team, terrific. But if someone's, I think that's the natural progression, then you'd be like, okay, that's not the direction I want you to go in. I want you to have some substance behind that as the reason why you want to go down that route, because there's brilliant people who can do just straight up offensive web application pen testing or mobile pen testing or whatever, and not do pure red team. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's not the utopia that everyone should want to reach. You can be comfortable in your own skin.
Definitely, mate. Cool. All right then, my friend. On to resume formatting. I always think you can ask 10 different people this question and get like 7 or 8 different answers. So everyone has a slightly different take on it and preferences. But in terms of resume formatting, what do you like to see, mate?
I think, like you said there's loads of debate around this, but I think for me, the non-negotiable is reverse chronological order, having your most recent role at the start and then your oldest job and your education at the end, and those ones being fairly brief, and the chunky bits that people want to read about at the start of the page. We talked about it briefly earlier on, having your certs that are relevant and visible at the top. For me, there ain't really no right or wrong answer, but the most recent role is crucial. 2 or 3 if there's been short stints, and that's through no fault of anyone's own at the moment, where some people do have short stints on the resume. I've seen people putting on like result of a layoff and things like that, which obviously catches your eye because you do know that's happened a little bit in the industry. But what I look for is like the what and the how. So if you're talking like in our industry, I might see someone's resume which might say, I did a SailPoint implementation. And you're like, okay, that's great. What's the how, or how did that fit into the organization? So that might be followed up with, as part of a 3-strong team that onboarded 200 applications for a financial services institution. Like that kind of thing in those examples is what catches a recruiter's eye. And I guess there's one other thing which is, it's just come into my head that I've seen a little bit at the moment, is sometimes in the kind of in-house recruitment world, we use applicant tracking systems. And to some people, like all the resumes and CVs have have to flow through them. And it can sometimes knock out the formatting if it's not in a fairly straightforward manner in a PDF or a Word document or something like that. Because you see these like really groovy resumes, which are great to read, but if they do end up knocked out of format in applicant tracking system, they can come through as plain text or rich text with all different characters in it, which is a bit unusual to read. So just bear that in mind when you're doing the resume.
Yeah, cool. I really like what you just said there about people explaining the layoff as well, because in the recruitment industry, I know you'll know what this means, we call it jumpy, and that means if someone's had some short stints. But the first question anyone's going to ask if you've had some short stints are, everyone's going to ask. So I think explaining it if it's been a layoff, but even if it's just something in general that's happened, I think be really forthcoming with it. I think it's the best port of call, don't you?
Totally, yeah. And I think sometimes as a technical person or a salesperson or a corporate person, it can really eat you up a little bit when something's not been your fault or something's happened in the industry or whatever. But I think when you're doing your resume, if you take the kind of emotion out of it and you're looking at the bare facts, try and put yourself in the person's shoes that's going to be reading that resume, and that's twofold. One is, like you said, like the brutal honest truth of what it was so people can see it straight away. But secondly, bear in mind, particularly if it's for someone who's a cybersecurity consultant or whatever, the first person that's going to be reading that resume might not be a technical person. Is it written in a way where you can get across the key points about yourself, which is really good if you're scanning it for certs or the kind of companies you've worked at and that kind of stuff, but the person who's reading it is going to be able to understand it. So perhaps maybe even run it past a friend who's non-technical and say, hey, I know you're not going to understand all of this, but the general language that runs through it, do you get it? So that might be something that people can do as well.
Yeah, definitely. Do you like seeing a LinkedIn profile sent over, by the way? Do you like that, or do you prefer the resume?
Yeah, if it depends what there is. If someone's got a lot of information on the LinkedIn profile, great. Some people mirror the two entirely, lift and shift the information from one for the other. That's fine. But I think people can be as creative as they want when it comes to resumes, putting on interesting hobbies or clubs that they're involved in or that kind of stuff, or you might see someone with a wacky LinkedIn picture or something like that. I think it just adds a bit of character, so I have no issue with that. And there have been a couple of occasions where you've gone out and you've headhunted a brilliant candidate and they're just like, you know what, I've not done my CV for a few years because I'm not looking. And you're like, okay, I'll just work off your LinkedIn for now, and if we need a resume later, then we'll do something about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. You can sometimes get some mega people, and the resumes, like for that reason, are awful. Sometimes you can think, they must be good if the resume's been left alone for that long. Tony, let's say I'm in an interview with you. I'm a candidate interviewing with you. We come to the end. Should I be asking you questions at the end? Should I have some planned questions? If yes, how many? What's your thoughts and preferences and feelings there, mate?
100% asking questions. I personally, and this is just my take on it, be that as it will, but I don't think that the questions should be reserved explicitly for the end of the interview. I think as recruiters can be educating managers to leave time during the interview for the candidate to ask questions. And I think that's important because that's what gives a candidate the best platform to say stuff about themselves. If they just save all the questions to the end, and then when they get there, they're trying to rattle off in the last 5 minutes loads of answers or comebacks to what you're giving them as answers to those questions, then it can feel a bit rushed and they can not give the best version of themselves. I think one thing that we are seeing a lot of at the moment is people asking for situational based answers. Some people call it like STAR methodology and things like that, where you give an example of a situation, a task, an action, and a result. So think about that. And one thing that you can do in an interview is, I think there's two different types of questions you can ask. One is about like the company and the culture and the team, like super important, because that you got to know whether you're going to fit into that organization and that organization is the right fit for you. And I think the second one is about the job and the tasks and the way of working. So it's those kind of answers to the second questions which allows a good candidate to be able to, in inverted commas, sell themselves back to the interviewer. You know, you could turn around and say, in this role, Thomas, what kind of tasks would I be doing on a day-to-day basis? And you could say something to me like, you'll be responding to events which are captured in our SOC. And I go, okay, what kind of tools do you use for that? And you go, Splunk. And I go, oh, that's great, actually, because in my last job, I was answering 40 or 50 tickets a day using Splunk as the tool, so I know it really well. So a kind of fairly nothing question turns into a real opportunity to sell back as why you're good for that job, to differentiate yourself from other people.
Definitely, mate. It makes the interview so much more natural as well, rather than this. I couldn't agree more, mate. So just to recap for the listeners, first of all, 100% ask questions. Secondly, don't leave it till the end. I say ask questions more of a free-flowing manner right the way through. Questions that should be asked, definitely stuff on the team, on the culture, and definitely stuff on the sorts of tasks you'll be doing and the way in which you'll be working.
Yeah, definitely. I think the only caveat to that is I do know that in some of the really big tech companies, they sometimes do say at the start, I've got a set of questions that I need to ask you, and if you want to ask anything, you've got to wait to the end. So if that's their way of doing it and the way they go about things, then fair enough. But do I think that's the right way? Candidly, no. That's just my take on it.
Cool, mate. Some really big tech firms, they literally they have almost like a program that spits questions out, don't they? And it changes them all the time and randomizes them and stuff like that. So.
Yeah.
So, big question coming up. What's the best security interview you've ever done and why?
So I knew this question before I came into this, so I thought about it long and hard. Got two really brief examples. So two instances spring to mind. There was one guy who'd been out of the industry for a little while, but he came in as a referral, and he'd been working in a shop or a store or something like that, but still trying to do a bit of pen testing on the side. And we put him through a technical pen testing challenge, and he got the highest score I've ever seen on it. Like, it basically broke the scoring matrix. He did that well on it. We hired him immediately, and he probably doubled or trebled whatever he was earning, like working in the store as a pen tester. So I guess like the message from that really is, if you've got that dream there, then chase it. Go after it, have a crack at it. And he'd probably been thinking, haven't found a job for a little while, things were getting a bit down, am I ever going to get back into the industry? But because he'd kept doing a little bit of in his spare time, when the time was right, he absolutely nailed it and got the job, like with the highest score that I've ever seen on the challenge that we gave him. So that was that one. And the second one, it's a little bit off piece, but it was for a cybersecurity sales job. And this guy turned up to our office, and he was one of two for final interview. And he turned up prepped to the max. He had copies of his resume to hand out to everyone who was in the room. He had a brag file or sheet with all the key deals that he's done and that kind of stuff. He'd just really gone like above and beyond by finding out who our clients were and connections he had in the business. And he nailed it and blew the other guy out of the water. It was one of the best interviews I've ever seen because I sat in it. But how do I relate that back to what we're talking about here? There's no difference in the technical world or even in the remote world. You can send across to your interviewer before that meeting a brag file or a sheet and say, this is the kind of stuff I've been involved in. These are some of the brilliant bug bounties I've been involved in. These are some of the vulnerability finding tools I've used or whatever, and then to get your foot in the door that way in advance of the meeting. So I guess preparation is like what we're looking for going into these.
Yeah, no, definitely, mate. Thanks for that. I like those two stories. Yeah, and also on the second point, Tony, like, a lot of this stuff can be documented online, whether it's on GitHub repos or whether it's on LinkedIn or whether it's YouTube channels, and that can just be displayed really easily. So, yeah, I think arguably in the digital world, it's easier because you can like really make it accessible. But on that, mate, this might be like a really difficult question to ask, but any idea, that guy that had been out of the industry, the fact that he absolutely killed that CTF, do you know what he'd done anything different while he was out, or just kept himself sharp, or was it just raw natural talent, or any inside info there?
He was running bug bounties, working on them like in his spare time. He was having a crack at all these other ones and earning a bit of cash here and there. And probably, I reckon if that guy had probably dedicated himself to bug bounty full time, then he might have made a decent living out of it. But he was obviously doing a day job to pay the bills, doing a bit of that on the side. But to your point, keeping himself sharp by seeing all these different things that was going on in the industry and not just being like pigeonholed into one particular kind of vulnerability he had to find, or working in-house in one organization, managing one security program, because he'd seen so much. It kept him sharp. And I think he was just a naturally talented guy as well. Sometimes you get that, don't you? If someone, told me to go and process a loads of numbers or do something like that, I'd find that really challenging. But for him, he was quite natural to that kind of pen testing world.
Yeah, definitely, mate. And on the second point, the natural talent bit is obviously that's maybe not for everyone listening, but on the preparation point for that second guy, there's just no excuses. Like, we're living in the age of the internet, you can prep, and I like the what do you say, brag file. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. Some people call it a brag file. You cheat, you take your interview, whatever. This guy was like, here's the companies which I've done deals with. In the technical world, it can be like, here's some of the, like I said, vulnerabilities I've found, or bug bounties I've worked on, or projects that I've worked on doing red teaming for this organization, and I did a black team ops with this organization, or whatever, just to differentiate yourself. And he turned up with all this stuff, even like he brought in a little folder and all that kind of business. And I was like, this guy really wants this job. He's not turning up to like mess around and go through the motions. He's really bought into this, and he wants to work at this organization.
Mate, I just think that's massive, mate. And I did a post about it the other day. I think the value of that you just mentioned is going up and up and up, because as AI and automation and tech just becomes more and more prevalent, that attention to detail and that level of just really being like super conscientious and caring and showing that you want it and you detail, I think it stands out more and more as time goes on.
Yeah, I think little things like reading, making notes, actually listening when people are talking. I think there's a big value for me, and even on meetings, like being on camera and noticing people's cues and that kind of stuff. All these little things can help you develop, and then when the time's right, it can help you craft a good story for yourself of the stuff that you've been through. So the world of AI and everything else is super important, and it's bleeding into our lives in many different ways. But don't forget that sometimes the old school methods work as well, and they can get your foot in the door too.
Definitely. And listening, being a good listener's harder than you think. I think I mentioned it on a previous show, but I found since doing the pod, you've got to, it sounds easy, but it's not. If you want to listen to everything and not interrupt, and you've got to think about it, mate, haven't you?
Yeah, I think it's the distractions as well. I'm sat here talking to you, and I've got emails going off over there. I've got Teams messages over there. I've got 2 mobile phones which are going off. There's people walking past outside. It's those like distractions that make listening and concentrating in the modern world really difficult. And if someone's, say, been through school or college or whatever, and they've only been in the world of work for 2 or 3 years, then those distractions are constant. To actually sit down and focus and get stuck into something is very challenging. So I do sympathize with some people that are trying to find that as a new way of learning, perhaps, than it might have been older, like in days, it might have been easier in days gone by without all the distractions.
Back in our day, mate, eh?
During the war, yeah. I still read the newspaper every day, so I'm pretty old school.
Mate, look, mate, I'm sure you've seen some mega candidates over the years. What do you see, and what can the listeners learn from you in the sense of what do you think separates a good or an average guy or girl up to a mega or an awesome guy or girl in the security world?
It's a good question, and I think that particularly in the modern world like now, I think it's the proactive candidates that differentiate themselves from other people. It's ultra competitive at the moment. And to put it in perspective, if you go out and you advertise a cybersecurity role, you'll get loads of people applying for it, because unfortunately there's lots of people who are out of work. There's some people that are just chancing their arm. There's some people that are out of the industry looking to get back in. You're up against people from all different kinds of backgrounds. So I would say that from a mega candidate point of view, it's the personalization when it comes to applying for jobs. Anyone that kind of reaches out with a personalized message to either a recruiter or a hiring manager is much more likely to get a foot in the door rather than just blindly applying for a role. And you can perhaps relate that back to what I said earlier on, which is even in a short message, not something that's War and Peace, because no one will read that. But if it's just a few lines long, which is like, hey, I'm dead interested in the job. I saw in the job description that you're looking for X. I've done X, Y, and Z at my current organization, so I think I'm a good fit. Would you have a chat with me? And if someone sent that to me, I would speak to that candidate nearly every time. Other companies won't. They don't have the bandwidth to be able to do that. But I would actually try and speak to that candidate because they've gone out of their way to do that. It's a way of differentiating yourself between everyone else who's applied. And sometimes it's difficult for recruiters, yourself or even us in-house, where you're getting 1,000 applicants for a job. It's difficult to get through them all, particularly with an applicant tracking system and things like that. So that's one thing. And I think the other thing I've seen from really good candidates is people that can leverage the networks. Networking cybersecurity is a really powerful thing. From using a network, you could perhaps pick up a mentor or hear about a cool, I don't know, new tool or way of working which has come onto the market, or one of these people in your network might go to a new organization that's currently hiring, or they may even become a hiring manager or something like that. So never underestimate the power of connections, because they could be there when you need them the most.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, mate. So we've got the proactive candidates are what's going to separate themselves from a crowded and noisy market. Personalization's key. Keep the message short. That's a massive one, but it's got to be short and punchy to hold people's attention these days, and leveraging your own network. Tony, you know, if I am listening now and I'm applying for a job, when you say reach out, is that connection request on LinkedIn with a message? Is it just a connection request on its own? Is it email? Is it through the careers page? What's the most effective way to grab a guy like yours attention?
I think it's probably the same for you. I think we spend the majority of our lives as recruiters sat on LinkedIn. And I think if someone sends me a connection because they want to, as the name would suggest, be connected or see what each other's putting out in terms of posts, I'm always happy to accept those. But the actual personalised message which someone sends, like they're the ones which I would read when it's about a specific job. Emails, yes, I'll obviously read them, but sometimes we've got 100, 200, 300 emails flowing through our inbox every day. So sometimes it's a little bit more challenging to keep on top of them rather than a platform like LinkedIn, if that's where the job's advertised. But if it is just on a company's website, then obviously go and see if you can find that recruiter, or even better, if you can try and deduce who the hiring manager could potentially be and say, hey, I see that you're the leader of the red team at X company and you're hiring for a red team operator. I'm interested for X, Y, and Z. Would you have a chat with me? If you're not the right person, who should I speak to? And then they might direct you to the recruiter. And then when you speak to the recruiter, you're not speaking to the recruiter with a cold outreach. You copy and paste in the conversation you've had with the hiring manager and saying, hey, I've been proactive and reached out to X person. I heard that you're the right person to speak to. Please, can we have a chat? So then you're using your own networking skills and showing how you're a good communicator to bring people together.
Yeah, thanks, mate. And do you know what I was thinking as you say that? I was thinking two things. It will work so well. And I think the reason it does work so well is because so few people will do that. So for everyone listening, please do this. That will be effective just because it will stand out, because you'll be like, you know, he or she's put some effort in. It does matter, especially at the minute. This type of thing I think is imperative. So thanks, mate.
Yeah, I think sometimes you'll hear about some of the big companies, again, big tech, Silicon Valley, whatever you want to call them, where they might get a bit cheesed off because they might get outreaches all the time. And I've heard scenarios where people have interviewed there and they've been told specifically, do not contact the interviewer after you've had the interview. Everything's got to run through the recruiter. If that was me, I'd just be ignoring that and reaching out anyway, because I'd be wanting to get stuck in and roll my sleeves up and make stuff happen. But some companies are firm on that. I'd rather be told off for not doing something rather than not have a crack at doing it and trying it if I really wanted to go and work there.
Mate, listen, obviously recruiter to recruiter, I'm massively on the same page. I just think nothing happens unless you go out there and get it, especially in a big, busy market. But my whole thing is, I think you can be as persistent as you want as long as you're polite. Just really polite and really persistent, I say. So you're not like too full on, but I think if you're nice, you're okay.
Yeah, I think that's it. There's no excuse whatsoever for manners. And I think as long as you are, like you said, you're polite and you're doing stuff in the right way and you're not coming across as like aggressive or condescending or anything like that, then people should really give you the time of day. And if they don't, then is that the kind of person you want to work for? Probably not.
Yeah, no, definitely, mate. Definitely. Cool, mate. Brings us quite nicely on to my next question, which is regarding communication skills. Talked about it a lot on the pod so far. I feel like it's been important for a long time, but it's getting more and more important. First of all, thoughts on communication skills, and then secondly, tips for improving and enhancing them?
Yeah, I think there's lots of free resources out there, isn't there, right? You can look at things like Portswigger, SANS, Try Hack Me, Hack the Box, Cybery, stuff like that, where you can try and vary your own learning through different sites like that and learn new methodologies and styles which can kind of shape your own comms. And I think you've got lots of super talented people that are working in the US or the UK where that's not their home native country. And I think learning even different accents and different styles of communication, and people that talk weird in America like I do, sometimes even Americans can't understand me. So I think if you speak to as many people and interact with people from lots of different backgrounds, it'll really help you have a more well-rounded view of the international world in which we work, but also from a communication point of view, the understanding and picking up different words and things like that will help you from your side. I think the other thing which is sometimes overlooked a little bit is writing. If you're in offensive security and you're having to write reports all the time, or if you're more on the blue team side and you're responding to incidents and having to provide a report on that afterwards or whatever, there's loads of different tips around that online to help you evolve and craft whatever writing style that you want. But I would say definitely don't overlook that. Keep practicing it, because that'll set you apart from the other competition as well.
Yeah, it will, Tony. Yeah, not just verbal, written as well, as obviously absolutely imperative. Have you ever had anyone think you're from a completely different place to where you're from, Tony? I've had all sorts with a northern accent.
All the time, yeah. I live probably about 35 miles outside Atlanta, and there's very few British people here, so I get Australian and South African and New Zealand all the time, yeah, which is great. It's interesting because we are definitely turning into more of a multicultural world wherever you go, and it's always nice to chat to people. But I've also had people saying, "Oh, you're from England, John from London." I'm like, surprisingly enough, I don't know John from London that you met on a cruise. But yeah, it's always interesting when people say that.
It is, mate. Yeah, so looking at, so basically consuming the right information online, whether it's SANS, Portswigger, whatever other learning resource you might be. So when you're consuming that data, what we're saying is that information, that's going to improve naturally your written skills and your communication skills, because you're looking and absorbing information that has been pieced together by really switched on, sharp, talented people. So really absorb the right info, helps your knowledge, but also helps your levels of communications as well, yeah?
Totally, yeah, and varying them as well, not just using one and not the others. Have a crack and take little bits of everything, because they'll try and teach you in different ways, and no one's learning methodology is the same. You've got to find what works for you, and sometimes step out of your comfort zone and try one which is a little bit different than what you're used to, and that'll help you learn even more.
Cool, buddy. Remote working, big topic at the minute. You've only got to mention remote working on LinkedIn and you get quite a lot of traction on a post these days. I kind of think, Tony, since remote working, I feel that some juniors might be missing out. I know before we came on air just now, we were talking about you being back in the day when you were agency side in the office. You learn a lot through osmosis when you're with people and brushing shoulders and water cooler chat, as it sometimes gets referred to. But the long-winded way, mate, of basically saying, I think juniors are perhaps missing out to a certain extent because of remote working. Have you got any tips for those juniors and not getting that in-person learning that me and you would have got with our careers back in the day?
Move closer to an office.
Really?
I don't think, in my opinion, there's anything that can beat that, really. I think when you're around people that are doing the same job as you, like whether you use the phrase that you did through osmosis or whether it's just through brushing shoulders with people, I think that is where you learn the most stuff. And I think there's a couple of things here that are in play. I think total remote working is actually a fairly new concept, isn't it? And I think managers are still really working out a good way to give a good service, if you will, to like the remote employees. And it's taking managers a bit of time to work out what that looks like, plan material, deliver it remotely. You can't just say, hey, let's talk about that right now. It's let's book 30 minutes into your calendar where we're both free to talk about it, which obviously delays people's progresses a little bit. And I think that onboarding is like the most critical part of a candidate journey. If someone has a shit onboarding, it's going to really stick with them forever, and you owe it to that candidate to give them a good onboarding into your organization. So I think I was talking to somebody the other day. There was an article last week in the newspaper which was about people refusing to go into an office. And I get that because people have shaped their lives around, they've got kids or they've got pets or they're not comfortable going to an office or whatever it might be. But when sometimes these people were surveyed and said, how did they feel? They actually said they were a little bit lonely. And people were like, okay, you are, but you're refusing to go into an office. Why aren't you going to an office? But I don't want to. But I think a lot of like your friendships, your relationships, the laughs, the struggles, opinions that you form about life itself can all come from the people that you mix with at work. And maybe with virtual reality on the horizon and things like that, to get people even more connected where you can see people through the mad visors or whatever it is, will help a little bit more. But I do get the remote thing for people that have got personal circumstances that they need to stick to. But I guess my huge advice for people, particularly early in their careers, is take it on the chin and move closer to an office, because you've got people that are moving to the other side of the world for the same job that you are and leaving the families behind because they want to learn and be around people.
Yeah, mate. Thanks, man. And listen, thanks for your complete honesty on that one as well, and not sugarcoating it. Because, yeah, it is. And look, no one truly knows the effects of widespread fully remote working yet, because I know some people have worked remote for a long time, but on the whole, it's a new thing. That lonely thing, mate, I've been having internal conversations in my own head about this, because I was like massively for remote work. And like just the other day, like I've had certain weeks, mate, where I've been really busy and I'm like, I've not seen anyone on a personal level properly for a few weeks now. That's quite bad. Do you know what I mean? And you've worked crazy hours, so it does worry me sometimes. But essentially, move closer to an office. The onboarding process is got to be right. Do you think there's a happy medium, Tony, for people that are at a more senior level, something like that? Or?
I do. I think the office. I think it depends what you want to be, right? If you're a middle manager, perhaps, and you're wanting to influence the careers of other people, then you've got to find a way that works. And I could be speaking out of turn here, but I don't think we're 100% there with finding the perfect way of. And I used the example of onboarding there, but also like the training and the touch points and making sure you can make these people the stars of tomorrow. I think that's incredibly difficult when you're doing it remotely. It's got to be a certain kind of person that's willing to invest a lot of time in doing that. But yeah, if it's someone that's senior who's working, say, with a client 8 hours a day, 4 days a week, and there isn't really a need to go into an office, then I totally get that. And people have, like I said, I probably went hard on it, but if people have got commitments in their personal life or they don't want to go into an office or whatever because it makes them uncomfortable, the last thing you want to do is make someone uncomfortable. But I think from a learning perspective, I think you do miss out on a lot by not being around people who do the same job or similar jobs to what you do. And also you can learn a lot about how a business is put together. If you're wandering around doing the techie side, you could bump into the person that sold that deal that you're working on and learn more about that. Or you could see the finance person and find out a little bit about that. Or you could brush shoulders with HR who are doing background screenings for clients to understand a bit more about that. So I think you get a more well-rounded education in the business world as well.
Definitely. Also, as well, just the mental aspect of you have a really rough day, a really bad day. If you're around 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people, it's a lot easier. If you're on your own, I think it's harder.
Bouncing those ideas and sharing your struggles and saying, hey, this didn't go well today. What do you think? And they're like, that happened to me last week and I did this. And you've immediately learned something which took 10 seconds, like that kind of stuff. So that happens all the time in the world of work, be that in person or remote. But yeah, you have more of those, to your phrase earlier, the water cooler or coffee machine these days moments or whatever, when you're doing your chai, double espresso latte with ice and hot milk or whatever it is, to find out more about each other.
Sounds nice, mate.
Yeah.
No,
mate, do you know what?
That. Yeah. Do you know what? It's when you actually stop and think, like at the minute, like post-COVID hiring boom, everyone overhired. Now we've got layoffs. Then we've had this. Then we've got remote work thrown in there. Then we've got all this stuff going on in the market. It's a crazy market. I don't know. Like I won't get onto politics, but it's just a mental world full stop at the minute, isn't it?
Yeah, candidates have really been through the ringer. We've seen reduction in force all over the place. We've seen offers being pulled because roles have gone on hold. We've seen budgets being cut. We've seen roles being moved offshore, all kinds of stuff like that, which have really hurt candidates in different regions. So I think there is light at the end of the tunnel. You'll know better than me from working across multiple different clients in the industry that there does seem to be some green shoots and more companies are going after and hiring new people. I know we certainly are here, and friends of mine in the industry are doing the same. So hopefully 2024, 2025 are much brighter years than perhaps the doom and gloom of 2021 and 2023, whereas 2022 was brilliant for candidates when everyone was hiring.
Mate, 22 was just ridiculous, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It was stupid.
I think if you was in recruitment in 2022 and you weren't making a load of money, then you were doing something really drastically wrong and you should probably go and do something else.
I think you're absolutely spot on. But yeah, certainly a topsy-turvy, interesting time. But yeah, on your point, what I worry about at the minute is, because there is green shoots, so there is still plenty going on. You know, if I'm talking like as a recruiter, you're working a bit smarter, you're working a bit harder, and I mean, 22 wasn't a normal market; that was never sustainable. But what I worry about with people see the big headlines. If I'm talking about candidates again, they see the headlines, they think it's all doom and gloom, and then they don't bother personalizing the message, or they don't bother reaching out to you, Tony, and sending you a little DM on LinkedIn because they think there's no chance. I think it is nice for the listeners to hear there is plenty still going on. There is loads of wins still out there. Is it harder? Yes, but there's a lot going on. If you're listening and you're approaching a director of talent acquisition like Tony, still do it. Still put the effort in. Still put the time in. Still prepare, because there's plenty going on. I just worry that people's mindsets might just completely go because they keep reading these big headlines, Tony.
One thing that people forget, and this was drilled into me a long time ago, is the delayed gratification side of things. The work that you do now, you might see a payoff for it in 6 months' time. So if you're going out and building a relationship with you, Thomas, at your organisation and saying, hey, so I'm not looking immediately now, but I'm looking for this kind of thing if it ever comes across your desk, then you're going to remember that when that does come across your desk as a recruiter. Or someone might reach out to me here and be like, I'm really interested in Simio. I've got X years of experience doing sale points implementations. And I might be like, oh, we haven't got something like that immediately. We have. If you're out there, let me know. But if we do have someone that in a month's time, then I'll know who it is to reach out to. So don't get too disenchanted if there isn't something for you immediately. There might be something a little bit further down the line in the future.
And forever, you know this anyway, Tony, but for everyone listening, that happens in recruitment all the time. It always comes back round and things always loop back round. Definitely couldn't agree more. On that note, by the way, for people listening, who are you looking for? Who are you struggling to find? Who would you like to hear from at the minute, mate?
So we've got partnerships with different vendors in the identity and access management space. So ForgeRock, SailPoint, Savient, CyberArk, Ping, all these kind of organizations. So anyone with a background in that we're super interested in. Then we do a little bit of work in the kind of Microsoft Azure AD space and AWS and that kind of thing. But loads of stuff available on our website. We've got a huge offshore presence in India, which is really good for us and great for the clients as well, for being able to get lesser rates for them rather than paying big bucks. So I think it's a buoyant market that we're in. It's one that's going to continue growing for sure over the next 3 to 5 years in identity access management, because there's so much data flowing through organizations right now that's got to be protected in the right way.
Yeah, definitely, mate. Easiest way to get hold of your LinkedIn or email.
Yeah. It's if someone calls me up, terrific. Nobody picks up the phone anymore, and I always answer the phone. Always. And I'll always call people up myself. I advertised a job for a recruiter to work as part of my team a couple of weeks ago, about 10 days ago now, and it got 50 applicants, and everyone who personalised a message to me, I got back to them. Not one person called me up. I couldn't believe it. Maybe I'm old school, but I thought someone might have given me a call.
It makes a difference. I'm so interested to hear what you say about that, because I call guests for this podcast. If you want to keep the guests coming through to a good quality, good standard, you have to be pretty proactive. But I'm so interested to get you because the phones are quiet. People are shocked when you ring these days.
Totally.
But, yeah, no, definitely that really, and I think it shows an air of confidence and a kind of get stuff done type mentality. Yeah, mate, I'm glad you like.
Yeah.
Cool, mate. podcast? I don't know if you're a big reader or more of a podcast man, but book or podcast that's had the most positive impact on your career so far that could perhaps the listeners could find helpful as well?
I'm someone whose mind is in like many places, so I usually have music on like when I'm working, but I've only really got into podcasts over the last kind of couple of years. I think there's some good high performance episodes of that podcast in the UK. The Jake Humphreys one, which is on from time to time. I think there's been some good, there's some shockers, but I think there's some good ones on there as well. Book I read recently that was quite good was that Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. It's all about creating something and being passionate about it and then overcoming the hurdles, if you will, in that path to achieve success, which is quite often the case in any kind of cybersecurity job or recruitment process as a whole. So even though it's about more sports based and the world of Nike or Nike, whatever you want to call it, I thought it was an interesting read.
Definitely, mate. And you mentioned there like perseverance and tough times. Like sticking with anything, I think just has major benefits. Even doing the same thing for a long time and just doing a good job and doing what you said you were going to do, like that, if you do that for a sustained period of time, it doesn't get easy, but it gets way easier because everyone gets to know you and the industry and the community is smaller than you think. So yeah, I think especially in today's world, mate, like everyone wants everything yesterday, don't they? It's nice that you've got to realize it doesn't quite work like that.
No, I think perseverance has got to be there. And I think it's also got to be, what you're aiming for as well. I think it's much better to have your ambition outweigh your talent than your talent to outweigh your ambition. So see what you want to focus on and where you want to go, where you want to be, and there's going to be stuff that gets in the way and you might get laid off, or you might be put on a performance improvement plan, or you might be working in the wrong organisation for the wrong person, or you might all be plain sailing and you get promoted 3 times in 5 years. So you've got to take the rough with the smooth, roll with the punches, whatever kind of analogy you want to use there, and keep going and persevere, because you will get to where you want to go if you want it enough.
Definitely, mate. And again, mate, in agreement, success just typically isn't linear. And I just think as well, when it's going well, like we referenced 2022, when things are going well, anyone can do well. That's easy. It's when things are tough and going against you, it's how you react that is going to get you back onto those good times and ultimately make you successful, I think. So
yeah, I think it's taking each one as a learning thing as well. Can you sit back and be like, what did I learn from that? And what can I take away from it to be better in the future? Or what can I change to do slightly differently to improve that process that I'm working on, and that kind of thing. So even if there is something you perceive as being shit or a loss or something that hasn't gone well, try and take the positive out of it. And maybe that's the optimist in me, but I think if people can do that and take things as a learning point, that it's only going to help them with their careers.
Definitely, mate. I can tell you're a recruiter, mate, with that mindset. You need it. You have to be like that.
Yeah. Resilience is built into you.
Yeah, definitely, mate. We've talked a bit about interviews and preparing questions at the end and things like that. Any kind of things that I shouldn't be doing, mate? Any kind of mistakes that I should try and avoid, or the things that I should be aware of on that as a candidate?
I think there's one thing which it bleeds into a little bit of what we're talking about with kind of, there's some, let's be blunt about it, there's some candidates on the market at the moment who will have been to a lot of interviews, kissed a lot of frogs and not found their prince. And I think from that side of things, I've had a few interviews where people have come into it and you can tell that the energy is not there. I think that's super, super important at the moment. Come to the interview rested, full of energy, have a couple of espressos half an hour before if you need to, whatever it is, where you can really show that you're up for it. I think for an interviewer or for a recruiter or an in-house person or whatever, the worst thing is a flat interview. It drains the life out of you a little bit, and then it's difficult to get back on track for the rest of your day, and that interview will stick with you. So I think that's one thing. Another thing I've seen a little bit more of recently is like bad mouthing previous employers. Like, yes, you're leaving and you think that they're all dicks, but try and put a positive spin on it. The person you're interviewing with could know someone that still works there, or they might have a different opinion on that company, or they could be hiring for that role because the last person was really negative and they don't want to see that from you in the interview. So I think the energy and the positivity, they're two big things. If I'd add one thing for actual people who are interviewing as well, is one question you hear all the time is, why do you want to come and work at our company? How the hell is anyone going to know that at first stage interview? Like, it's a really odd and challenging question for a candidate to try and answer who knows very little about the role. From a candidate point of view, they could try and think of something interesting to answer that with in advance. Because I would say in 75% of interviews, they're going to get asked something like that. But you could flip it around and say, I'm not actually sure why I want to come and work X company yet until I've found out more about the role, but I'm super interested in the cybersecurity industry and you look like a market leader in it and somewhere where I can grow with my career. So that way you're not pandering to the interviewer themselves, but you're going back with something with a little bit more gumption about why you think it could be a good fit for you and your career.
Thank you, mate. There's some really good points in there, Tony. First one, energy. Make sure you're well rested. Don't go in there defeated. Essentially, if you're going to do something, just do it properly. And I know, like I say, for people listening, it might be hard at the minute, but that's vital. Second one, employers, that's just a massive. Now, I know I've got loads of clients that would just not. I actually knew one founder that used to try and push on that to see if anyone would say anything bad, because it was just such a non-starter for that particular chap. So don't badmouth your previous employers. You never know what the full story is. And a question you're probably going to get asked is, why do you want to work here? So bat it back to them a little bit and feel it out in that sense, mate.
Yeah, like I said, with that question, you're going to get asked it a lot, but I would twist it to use it as an opportunity to put the question back on them if you haven't found out enough so far. I'm not sure why I want to work at your organisation yet until I find out a little bit more about it, but the reason why I was attracted to your organisation was because of what I heard from the recruiter, Thomas, or because I've seen the stuff that you're doing in the industry, which is why I wanted to explore it further and try and tie it back a little bit like that.
Yeah, no, Tony, thanks, mate. And listen, this has been good, mate. And just to recap for the listeners, so much of it is about we've talked about personalization, we've talked about standing out, we've talked about doing things that probably most people aren't prepared to do. James Kahn from Dragon's Den, love him or hate him, he's got a recruitment background, and I think the phrase he uses is observe the masses and do the opposite, and don't just do what everyone else is that's applying for jobs. And mate, there's some good points in there. It's a tough market out there for some folks, so I think there's some useful bits in here, mate. But anything else, Tony, that we need to go over, mate? Or
no, I think that's good. I think the only thing I'd add is the one thing that I try and keep front of mind all the time is make good progress. I think you can sit still, but then you'll get a little bit of a win, and that's classed as progress. Then you go to the next step and the next step and the next step, and just treat your career search like that. And if there is something that doesn't go right, then see if you can learn from it, ask for feedback, and use that as progress next time. But been good. Thanks a lot for getting me on and grilling me with all these difficult questions.
It's been fine, mate. It's nice to catch up. I really like that one you said about, was it delayed gratification you said, or just, you really like that, mate, because we live in such an instantaneous culture with all these coaches around selling this idea and selling this, and you can do this overnight. So I think it's nice for people to hear that. But mate, hope you keep enjoying it that side of the pond, mate, and don't work too hard and all that. But no, listen, mate, thanks a lot, mate, and I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much. Cheers.